Hello folks, and welcome to Tech News Monday episode 6. Let's go ahead and jump in. First things first, let's go ahead and hop into some Samsung news here, starting off with the upcoming Samsung Galaxy Tab S9. Yeah, you heard that right. Now, according to the most recent reports, Samsung's next flagship tablet will be IP certified. We are likely looking at an IP67 rating, simply meaning that the device will have some resistance to water and dust, not necessarily to the extent where, you could go swimming and keep your tablet in your pocket or something, but still resistant enough to be able to stand some splashes or, partial immersion, along with a full protection against dust particles. And frankly, it's about time. It truly is about time. Not necessarily because we are demanding that Samsung makes a water-resistant tablet, but simply because Samsung has done this before, right? They've done this in the past with some of their previous tablets, specifically the active lineup of their tablet, like the Galaxy S3 Active, for example, which is an IP68 rated device. And on top of that, Samsung has actually been a pioneer and a leader in achieving some of these, IP ratings on some of their devices, notably, like the foldables, for example. The Samsung Galaxy Z Fold here that I have is an IP rated device. So to a certain extent it is, waterproof. And in my opinion, it is actually probably harder to achieve that here on the foldable than it is on the tablet. But I could be wrong, but I just feel like it would be harder to do that on the foldable. And if they've done that on the foldable, then why not on the tablets? But I digress here. In terms of the release of this upcoming Samsung Galaxy Tab S9, we are still looking at the third quarter of this year, so probably along with the foldables, or who knows, maybe Samsung would do kind of like a two parts where they do a Samsung Unpacked event, for maybe the tablets first, then a part 2 of it, another Unpacked event for the foldables, or vice versa, or maybe just combine and do both the tablets and the foldables. Again, we still don't know just yet. And speaking of foldables, this is actually a pretty nice segue into the next piece of news that we have here. So apparently the upcoming Galaxy Z Flip 5 and also the Z Fold 5 will be adopting water drop hinges and support for IPX8 rating, which again is another major move towards innovation on Samsung's part here. And again, still sticking with foldables here, there are new reports that the next Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 5 will still support the Samsung S Pen, but unfortunately for many of us, Samsung will not include kind of an S Pen chamber, like it is the case, for example, with the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, where you have it directly, within the phone there. On the Z Fold, you actually have the actual pen separated, and it's a pretty thick one. Now, some of you may remember there were rumors that Samsung was working on a way to, include a spot on the device on the Z Fold, on the next Z Fold, that would house the S Pen, but it looks like it won't be the case here because Samsung seems to be running into some issues setting that up. Plus, again, as I mentioned earlier, because the S Pen on the Z Fold 4 right now is pretty thick, creating space within the phone to include that would make the phone even thicker, which again is understandable because look at the size of this pen. Now, with all that being said, you're probably thinking, then why don't they just make a smaller S Pen, maybe something that would mimic what we have with the S23 Ultra here, which of course would be a good point and actually a pretty good question. But apparently Samsung actually considered that also, but then they felt as though the user experience would be affected if they were to make something smaller, which I would actually agree because I have a hard time using the smaller S Pen on the S23 Ultra here. Now, still sticking with foldables here. Tons of foldable news, still sticking with foldables, but this time around we are going on the Google side with the upcoming Google Pixel Fold. And you all may know this already, but Google has been working on a foldable phone for a little while now, and the latest reports that we have are actually setting this phone to be announced and launched sooner than anticipated. In fact, many of these leaks are pointing to Google's developers conference that typically happens in May as the time that, this could potentially be not only announced, but also be launched. So they would be planning on doing, pushing this phone out, the Fold, along with the upcoming Pixel tablet. But then again, another rumor actually points out that it could potentially drop in August, just like the Samsung foldables, which would be pretty cool in either case, right? So if you think about it, the phone is actually set to compete directly, with the already established Galaxy Z Fold line. So for me personally, I think it would be pretty nice to see some competition out there, right? Now, we're looking at some pretty impressive specs on this phone here, especially being the first Fold that, Google is working on. So the specs are showing a 5,000 milliamp battery. So that's something that's actually slightly larger than what you have on the Z Fold 4 right now. The resolution actually comes also pretty close to what you have with the Z Fold 4. Even the size is actually fairly close to the Z Fold 4 at 7.69 here. 120 hertz refresh rate, of course, just like you would expect on a flagship. And the price tag would be nearing the $1799, but we'll wait and see. Now, jumping on the next set of news here, there are reports that Qualcomm will be dropping their next flagship chipset a bit earlier than anticipated. The leaks are actually pointing out to a time frame of about, early fourth quarter of this year, meaning sometime in October. And of course, the reason this is news is because even though the current Qualcomm's flagship chipset, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, was announced and showcased during Qualcomm's annual Snapdragon Summit at the end of the year, at the end of last year, it truly saw its mainstream adoption late in the year, right? And it was actually pushed even further, or pushed forward even more, when it was finally attached to the very popular Samsung Galaxy S23 series. So now with the next iteration of this chip, we are likely going to see an even early adoption of it, right? And it will be pushed forward even earlier than it was this year, probably starting off with the upcoming Xiaomi 14 series. But anyways, I think we've covered a good chunk today, and that would be enough for this edition of Tech News Monday. I will have more on the next episode. I will stay updated so that you stay updated. Up until that next episode, of course, as always, stay safe out there.